ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जायमुदीरये। नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवतसेवया भगवतीरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। ॐ ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामीनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. By His divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Sri Prabhupada Ki Jai. We are reading from Canto 4, Chapter 28. Puranjana becomes a woman in the next life. We are at text 57. So this is the section where Avidnyat Sakha, that is the Lord in the heart, he comes as a Brahmana and is instructing Vaidarvi, who is lamenting upon the departure of Malayadvaja. This is the final section of this particular chapter. Text 57. पंचेन्द्रियार्थ आरामा द्वार प्राणानव प्रभो तेज आपान्निकोष्ठानि कुलमिंद्रिय संग्रह. Translation.
My dear friend, the five gardens are the five objects of sense enjoyment, and the protector is the life air, which passes through the nine gates. The three apartments are the chief ingredients: fire, water, and earth. The six families are the aggregate total of the mind and five senses. Purport: the five senses that acquire knowledge are sight, taste, smell, sound, and touch, and these act through the nine gates: the two eyes, two ears, one mouth, two nostrils, one genital, and one rectum. These holes are compared to gates in the walls of the city. The principal ingredients are earth, water, and fire, and the principal actor is the mind, which is controlled by the intelligence, that is buddhi. Hare Krishna.
So now here is the summary of what this city constitutes of. City was conceived to be having the five gates, and now the previous verse, text 56, is very elaborately explained in this verse. So 56 through 58. Text 58. विपणस्तु क्रियाशक्ति भूतप्रकृति अव्यया शक्त्यधीशा पुमांस्त्वत्र प्रष्ठितो नावबुध्यते. Translation.
Translation: the five stores are the five working sensory organs. They transact their business through the combined forces of the five elements, which are eternal. Behind all this activity is the soul. The soul is a person and enjoyer in reality. However, because he is now hidden within the city of the body, he is devoid of knowledge. Purport: the living entity enters the material creation with the aid of the five elements: earth, water, fire, and ether, and thus his body is formed. Although the living entity is working from within, he is nonetheless unknown. The living entity enters the material creation, but because he is bewildered by the material energy, he appears to be hidden. The bodily conception of life is prominent because of ignorance. Navabudhyate. Intelligence is described in the feminine gender, but owing to her prominence in all the activities, she is described in this verse as Adisha, the controller. The living entity lives by means of fire, water, and food grains. It is through the combination of these three that the body is maintained. Consequently, the body is called Prakriti, material creation. All the elements gradually combine to form flesh, bone, blood, and so on. All these appear as various apartments. It is said in the Vedas that the digested foods are ultimately divided into three. The solid portion becomes stool, and the semi-liquid portion turns into flesh. The liquid portion turns yellow and is again divided into three. One of these liquid portion is called urine. Similarly, the fiery portion is divided into three and one is called bone. Out of the five elements, fire, water, and food grains are very important. These three are mentioned in the previous verse, whereas sky, ether, and air are not mentioned. This is all explained in Bhagavad Gita 13.20. Prakritim purusham chaiva vidya anandi ubhava api vikarmas cha gunams chaiva vidhi prakriti sambhavam. Material nature and the living entity should be understood to be beginningless. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. Prakriti, material nature, and Purusha, the living entity, are eternal. When they both come in contact, there are different reactions and manifestations. All of them should be considered the results of the interaction of the three modes of material nature. Hare Krishna.
So here is the summary of which are the places and what is the description of the body. So the five gardens are the five sense objects. 9 gates are the 9 openings of the body, as described in the previous purport. The guard which is explained is the life air. 3 apartments are earth, water, and fire. So these are the 3 apartments. Right. 6 families are 5 knowledge acquiring senses and the mind. Manashasthani indriyani. 5 stores are 5 action senses. So previous were the Jnanendriya, now they are the Karmendriyas. 5 powers of state are the 5 gross elements, Panchabhuta. One mistress is the intelligence, and Srila Prabhupada describes intelligence is feminine in nature, and therefore she is considered as a mistress. And the one master, the king of this entire body, is the Jiva, Jivatma, who is actually, Prabhupada says here, he is the enjoyer in reality. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada further explains that the living entity comes under the material grip, enters the body, and this is how he becomes devoid of knowledge. What is the knowledge? The knowledge of his Sambandha Gyan and his eternal reality. And he is overwhelmed by this particular city and takes the city all in all, and the interactions with other cities, and thus the soul is completely delusional or bewildered. Srila Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita here that the material nature and the living entity should be understood to be beginningless. They are both eternal, but when they come in contact, there are different actions and reactions. Right. So this is how the whole thing is happening. Text 59. तस्मिन् त्वं रामया स्पृष्टो रममाणो श्रुतस्मृतिः तत्संगादीदृशं प्राप्तो दशां पापीयसीं प्रभो.
Translation. My dear friend, when you enter such a body along with a woman of material desires, you become overly absorbed in sense enjoyment. Because of this, you have forgotten your spiritual life. Due to your material conceptions, you are placed in various miserable conditions. Purport: when a person becomes materially engrossed, he has no capacity to hear about spiritual existence. Forgetfulness of spiritual existence entangles a man more and more in material existence. Such is the result of sinful life. Various bodies are developed with material ingredients because of different types of sinful activities. King Puranjan assumed the body of woman Vaidarbhi as a result of his sinful activities. Bhagavad Gita clearly says, Striyo Vaishyas Tathas Shudras, that such a body is lowborn. If one takes shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, he can be elevated to the highest perfection even though he be lowborn. One acquires lower births when one's spiritual intelligence is reduced.
Yeah. So now he says, Hey Prabhu, so my dear master, if you see last 4 verses, The Avidnyata Sakha is the Supreme Lord talking to living entity, and he's calling Bandho, Prabho, Prabho. Right. This is the Sambodhan by Avidnyata Sakha, that is the living entity. You enter the body with the material desires, okay, and the desires and intelligence, they are considered feminine, and you therefore become overly absorbed in sense enjoyment, and because of this you have forgotten your spiritual life. And due to these material conceptions, you are placed in the various miserable conditions. Anaham vishatah kruran samsareshu naradhaman क्षिपामि अजस्र अशुभान आसुरीषु योनि एव योनिषु asurim yoni mapanna mudha janmani janmani. That this is the process of complete entanglement of the living entity. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, when a person becomes materially engrossed, he has no capacity to hear about the spiritual existence. And what happens is, he enters such an environment, and one very important thing in the life is, environment is extremely powerful, far more powerful than the willpower, right? Simply by will, you cannot change the thing. You know, I mean, I can go on for 3 hours on this topic. I'll just tell you one very simple example. Recently, me and my very good friend, our Krishna Kishore Prabhu, we were discussing one of our classmate, very ordinary, I mean, so at least reasonably good boy, but as such quite ordinary. He he used to come to him and ask him, some this query, that query, this and that. Average intelligence. Later, this one, this Prabhuji and we ourselves, we chose to be in Pune, and and we are happy, we are extremely happy about it. But I'm just giving this from a different perspective. And this boy, who was very ordinary as such, he went on to do his MS, PhD abroad. We did it in India, he did abroad. And he came back and he joined one of the IIT as a big professor. And now 20, 25 years down the line, you have dozens of patents, hundreds of publications, and he has become a big man in academics. But we know that in undergraduate, he was with us, and what kind of silly doubts he used to ask, right? So what this means is, environment is extremely powerful than just the willpower. And therefore, when we want to improve our performance, we have to improve our environment. Just like, improve japa, go to temple and chant. Temple, there is a very vibrant atmosphere of chanting the holy names, or at least join some japa group in the morning and chant. Want to, study Srimad Bhagavatam, we can join with, just like we are studying here together Srimad Bhagavatam. So environment is very, very powerful. Simply by willpower, it is not possible. And now the living entity, he comes to this material environment, and what happens is, because the living entity comes to material environment, he becomes completely overwhelmed by that material environment. And then Srila Prabhupada further describes that the living entity takes the body one after another. And here there is a reference to Striyo Vaishya Tata Shudras, that the female body is considered, so that is purely from the tapasya perspective, right? Srila Prabhupada writes a beautiful purport in the teachings of Queen Kunti. I think this is text 3, where Kunti Maharani is also taking the very humble stance and saying, Katham Paschemahi Striya Tatha Paramahamsana Munina Mumalapatmanam. She is saying that you are the subject matter of Paramahamsas. How can a lady like me understand you? And Prabhupada writes, the humility of Kunti Maharani makes her far beyond many of the great, the tapasvis. And that humility is the hallmark of the feminine nature. But from the tapasya perspective, the body is considered to be not very suitable for the living entity. Again, the living entity is neither the male nor the female. Text 60. न त्वं विदर्भसुहिता नायं वीरसुरत्तवः न पतिस्त्वं पुरञ्जन्या रुद्धो नवमुखे यया. Translation.
Actually, you're not the daughter of Vidarbha, nor is this man, Vilaya Dhwaja, your well-wishing husband, nor were you the actual husband of Puranjani. You were simply captivated in this body of 9 gates. Purport. In the material world, many living entities come into contact with one another and, increasing their attachment to a particular type of body, become related as father, husband, mother, wife, etc. Actually, every living entity is a separate individual being, and it is because of this contact with matter that he comes together with other bodies and becomes falsely related. False bodies create various associations in the name of family, community, society, and nationality. Actually, every living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the living entities are overly engrossed in the material body. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, appears and gives instruction in the form of Bhagavad Gita and Vedic literatures. The Supreme Lord gives these instructions because he is the eternal friend of the living entities. His instructions are important because by them the living entity can obtain liberation from bodily engagement. As water passes down a river, many straws and grasses are carried from the shore. These straws and grasses come together in the river's current, but when the waves toss in this way and that, they are separated and carried somewhere else. Similarly, the innumerable living entities within this material world are being carried by the waves of material nature. Sometimes the waves bring them together and they form friendship and relate to one another on a bodily basis of family, community, or nationality. Eventually, they are thrown out of association by the waves of material nature. This process has been going on since the creation of material nature. In this regard, Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur sings, Miche maya ravase yacha bhese kacha habu dubu bhai jiva Krishna dasa ei vishwasa karle ta ara dukha nai. My dear living entities, you are being carried away by the waves of material nature. Sometimes you are on the surface, sometimes you are being drawn. In this way, your eternal life is being spoiled. If you simply catch hold of Krishna and take shelter of his lotus feet, you will once again get free from all the miserable material conditions. In this verse, the word Shruhuta, well-wisher, and Tava, your, are very significant. One's so-called husband, relative, son, father, or whatever cannot actually be a well-wisher. The only actual well-wisher is Krishna himself, as Krishna confirms in Bhagavad Gita 5.29. Suhrudam Sarva Bhutanam. Society, friendship, love, and well-wishers are all simply result of being packed in different bodies. One should know this well and try to get out of this bodily engagement into which one is thrown birth after birth. One should take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Return home, back to Godhead. Hare Krishna.
Yeah. And now here, Avidnyata Sakha is lifting the curtains, and the climax he says, Natvam Vidarbha Duhita. That, my dear lady, you are not Vaidarbhi. Nayam Veera Suruttava. Neither this well-wishing personality, Malayadhvaj, is your husband. You are actually a living entity. You are actually Atman, simply captivated by this Puranjanya, the city of 9 gates. Srila Prabhupada writes a very strong purport here. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that the living entities, they come in the material world, and by the incessant flow of the nature, waves of the nature, different living entities, as per their karmas, are united together so that they can exhaust and enjoy both their own karmas accordingly. Right? And this is just a karmic reaction which is going on. But to the degree we have Krishna in the center, that karmic reaction becomes very spiritual in nature, right? So, so what is important is keeping Krishna in the center. Otherwise, later also we will see this very strong explanation that just like every birth means parents, right? Without parents, there cannot be a birth. So every birth, one will receive father and mother. Every birth, there will be children. Every birth, there will be wife and husband. So the duty, especially in the human form of life, is to purify the attachment by connecting them to Krishna. And when the attachment is connected to Krishna, one can actually realize the real well-wisher, Suruttavaha. These are the important words here. Actually, is the supreme personality of Godhead. Otherwise, person is constantly overwhelmed, enamored by the material actions and reactions. Srila Prabhupada further explains that there are innumerable living entities and karmana daiva nitrena. They are bundled together as a family. But when they are in the bondage of the family, so now again we have to understand the perspective. The entire section is being spoken to make Prachina Barihishat retire from the family life because he's extremely attached, right? Those who are hearing this, who are just entering the family life, first thing you become attached before becoming detached, right? We have, multiple times we have seen this when Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master appeared in his dream. And Prabhupada's family was, especially not very cooperative family. It was not that. The wife had her own desire, her own thought process about spiritual life. Children were not interested. Tea or me, that very famous question. With this background. And when Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati appeared in the dream of Srila Prabhupada and asked him, Abhay, take sannyas. And Srila Prabhupada's first reaction was that, how horrible. This was the reaction. So there is, needless to say, one has to be extremely responsible in one's family life. At the same time, eventually, when the time is appropriate, one should come out of the family life as well. Not from the perspective of taking sannyas, but from the perspective of giving full attention to Krishna and not just getting engrossed in the family affairs. Srila Prabhupada quotes Bhaktivinoda Thakur here. Miche mayar veshe, yaksha veshe, खाचा हबुडुबु भाई जीव कृष्ण दास यही विश्वास कर ले तो हार दुख नहीं. That the living entity, he has to have just one vishwas. Avashya rakshibe Krishna. Jeev Krishna Das, karle vishwas, karle tohar dukkha nahi. Because the Supreme Lord is Srut, he is really real Srut, Srut Tavah, Bhoktaram Yatapasam, Surdam Sarva Bhutana. So society, friendship, love, well-wishers, all are good, but they have their own limitation. They have the limitation of being bound by time and space. And when somebody's time comes, it is, the person will move on to the next destination. So what is the real mood of a devotee is? Mood of a devotee is, by the mercy of the Lord, I'm having such wonderful family. Let me try to do the best. So let me try to do my best so that this material body, which is the anyway a bad bargain, can be utilized in the service of the Lord, and similarly the family can be utilized in the service of the Lord. So akinchana literally doesn't mean that one need not to be without possessions, but one has to give up the possessiveness. That is very important. So let us not miss Bhagavad Gita when we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam. And the context here is the extreme detachment is spoken, especially to make Prachina Barihishat retire from his family life. Text 61. Maya hesha maya srishtat yat pumansam striyam satim manyaseno bhayam yadvai hamsau pasya avayogatim. Translation.
Sometimes you think yourself a man, sometimes a chaste woman, and sometimes a neutral eunuch. This is all because of the body, which is created by the illusory energy. The illusory energy is my potency, and actually, both of us, you and I, are pure spiritual identities. Now, just try to understand this. I am trying to explain our factual position. But the factual position of both the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity is qualitatively one. The Supreme Lord is the Supreme Spirit, the Super Soul, and the living entity is the individual spiritual soul. Even though both of them are original spiritual identities, the living entity forgets his identity when he comes in contact with material nature and becomes conditioned. At such a time, he identifies himself as a product of the material nature. Because of the material body, he forgets that he is the eternal, Sanatan, part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is confirmed in this way. Mamaivanshu Jivaloke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. The word Sanatan is found in several places in Bhagavad Gita. Both the Lord and the living entity are Sanatan, eternal, and there is also a place known as Sanatan because beyond this material nature. The real residence of both the living entity and the God is the domain of Sanatan, not this material world. The material world is the temporary, external energy of the Lord, and the living entity is placed in this material world because he wanted to imitate the position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this material world, he tries to enjoy his senses to his best capacity. All the activities of the conditioned soul within this material world are perpetually taking place in different types of bodies. But when the living entity acquires developed consciousness, he should try to rectify his situation and again become a member of the spiritual world. The process by which one can return home back to Godhead is Bhakti Yoga, sometimes called Sanatan Dharma. Instead of accepting a temporary occupational duty based on the material body, one should take to the process of Sanatan Dharma or Bhakti Yoga so that he can put an end to this perpetual bondage in material bodies and return home back to Godhead. As long as human society works on the basis of false material identification, all the so-called advancements of science and philosophy are simply useless. They only serve to mislead human society. Andha yathandhair upaniyamanaha. In the material world, the blind simply lead the blind.
Yeah. Now the Abhignat Sakha, he is explaining to Vaidarbhi that sometimes you think yourself as a man, just like in previous life you were Puranjan. Sometimes you think yourself as a chaste woman, and sometimes a neutral enge. So all this is because of the bodily conception of life, which is the illusory energy. And this potency of the illusory energy is bewildering you because you have come under the material domain. Actually, both you and me, we are spiritual in nature, Sanatana. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes about the qualitative oneness of the living entity. How, so here we will be seeing the section about qualitative oneness, quantitative difference. So those things are being explained by the Supreme Lord here. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that factual position of both living entity and Jiva, it is Sanatan. The living entity, the Supreme Lord is Sanatan. What is the meaning of word Sanatan? Sanatan means which has no beginning, no end. It is called as Sanatan. Lord is Sanatan, living entity is Sanatan, and relationship between both of them is also Sanatan, eternal. They are coming from a place which is Sanatan, that is Vaikuntha, and somehow they are here, especially the living entity is here, and thus he has to follow Sanatana Dharma to revive his consciousness, and that Sanatana Dharma is nothing but Bhakti Yoga. And this Bhakti Yoga has the potency to put to an end to this entire perpetual struggle for existence. And here, otherwise, Prabhupada says, it is simply one blind man leading another, andhaya tandhe rupagiyamana, and both of them falling to the ditch, without knowing who is the real living entity and what is good for the real living entity. So we will conclude here and continue tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you,
Prabhupada.
everyone.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.